Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Brian, and welcome to this week's webinar presented by International Security Training. This week, we're going to be talking about conducting ID checks. Now, you might need to do this for a regular private employer. You might be doing this for a nightclub, and most definitely, casinos are doing this on a daily basis. So let's look at our objectives for today. First, we're going to talk about the basics of ID checks. Then we're going to talk about the jurisdictional differences that a security professional may run into. And then also we're going to look at documentation practices, which depending on the industry that you work in or that you are providing security for, this could be very, very important to your employer. You know, when we look at the basics of IDs, I want you to think about how difficult this may be, especially, with the first item here. Does the picture match the person? A lot of people are like, well, that's easy. And I want you to think again. The things that we're looking for here are going to be the nose, the cheekbones, the chin, and the ears. You're going to be looking for the shapes of each of these body parts. You're going to be looking for the skin, any types of moles, tattoos, any specific distinguishable features. The reason why this becomes very difficult is, I guess, the two main reasons that that have caused me challenges in the past have been severe weight gain or severe weight loss, and then facial hair. So you really have to look at this, and it can be a very challenging and daunting task. And then if you have the right person on the ID, obviously do the simple one. It's check the date. Is the ID valid? Now, a lot of states are cranking out some driver's license and state IDs that are, they're valid for a very long time. You can have some 20 and 30-year IDs out there. But check it. Okay, try to consider and look and see if this ID has been altered in any way. Has the picture been swapped? Okay, maybe the date of birth has been smudged or typed over. This is so difficult because the printers and replication software that is out there and the scanners, you can be cranking out some really legit looking IDs. So you have to be careful. You have to be on on the top of your game. Is the ID counterfeit? Look at the watermarks. Look at the layered backgrounds that many states have. What's tough about this is you might have an ID that was created from legitimate pieces of stock. In other words, the plastic might be legitimate. They may have stolen the plastic. They may have stolen some of the watermarks. They may have stolen some laminate, some paper, some cardstock. So there might be one or two subtle differences. Make sure you know what your state, at least your state, has going on as far as driver's license and IDs. And as a manager or supervisor, it would be very, very good of you to train your staff on all of the states. Okay, make sure they know what all the states and provinces in your area have going on as far as IDs. Know what passports look like, know what IDs look like, and know what visas look like. Okay, again, some IDs are going to be more difficult than others to reproduce, so we have to stay on this game. The texture of an ID, feel that thing. All right, do you notice any bubbling of the laminate, any cuts or slices in the edges? Pay attention to these small details. Okay, now remember, some IDs may be real, but in the hands of someone who is not the legitimate owner. Okay, or obviously, like this plug says here, the person might be underage. Why? Because kids or just people don't have a valid ID will steal and borrow IDs from their relatives, with or without that relative's consent. So that is the main thing, right? Listen, it's very challenging to determine the face to photo when you are talking about relatives because genetic codes are strong in some families, and it's a really easy way to get over. So again, make sure you are on the top of your game. If you have any doubts, request a second form of ID. Okay, it doesn't even have to have the person's picture on it. Okay, if somebody has two forms of ID, one with picture and then one without, chances are it's going to be legit. Okay, so go ahead and talk to your management and your employer about those possibilities as well. When we look at jurisdictional differences, I guess the main things that come to mind are states and provinces, depending on if you're in, England, United States, or Canada, and also tribal nations, okay? Different states, provinces, and tribal nations may not have any laws that require a person to show you an ID. Again, that is public law that we're talking about. But that's okay. As a property owner, your employer can make showing a valid ID something that we call a condition of admittance. Okay? If the person doesn't want to show you the ID, that's cool. It's not a crime. However, they will have to leave your property. Again, they can make, it's their choice, and your boss, that's something that should be posted in several different areas, so that way when the security staff is trying to enforce this rule, they can point to the sign and shift some of the blame, okay? And that would that's somewhat of a psychological approach to problem solving and de-escalation that we use there when we have signage to defend our actions as far as security staff is concerned. Also, know and use the trespass laws in your jurisdiction. That way you can legally warn and remove people after you've decided it's time for them to go, okay? So, when you're removing people, again, every venue is a little bit different. Sometimes the front door person or the line security staff can make that decision. At other venues, you might have to call a supervisor before you remove somebody. That's cool. Just know what your employer expects of you, and on top of that, know the trespass laws in your area. I've worked for people, bosses, and clients who don't know the trespass laws, and sometimes they can get themselves in trouble. So I need to keep myself safe, so that way, no matter what happens to my employer, I'm good to go as far as making money and finding work. Okay? Documentation. Casinos are probably the most strict as far as this is concerned in the private sector. Logging in each ID check, well, that should be a normal practice. Okay, so if you're at a static post, which means you're standing there monitoring a traffic way, a corner, a desk, something like that, you may have a sheet of paper, or maybe it's a computer log of some sort that your management wants you to complete for every ID check. Okay, now the basic is getting the person's name, but sometimes we won't be able to get their name because they don't produce an ID and they elect to leave. Okay, sometimes if you're on a mobile patrol, you may have to call control and have them do the documentation. Either way, at a very minimum, the date, the time, and the number of people checked should be documented. Now, this information, depending on your industry, helps prove to any inspectors or auditors that your venue is meeting the legal requirements. And again, those requirements are going to be different when you're talking about nightclubs, maybe casinos, pharmaceutical manufacturing companies. Everybody's going to have different requirements. So, in conclusion, ensure that you and your staff understands the three basics. The basics of ID checks. I don't think we're ever going to be foolproof. The bad guys are getting smarter and smarter every day. Technology is helping them out. But you should be able to, find and detect at least 80% of what's coming through your door. Know the differences in jurisdictions. Again, are we talking about different states, provinces, or maybe tribal nations for your area where you are located, all right? And then consider the best documentation practices for your industry. Talk to your boss, talk to your employer, talk to your team about this, and make sure everybody is on the same page. And sometimes the security staff and the general management of the company might not know really what's going on. At that time, that's when you hire a third party, a lawyer, an auditor, or a specialist in your industry to keep you on the up and up. So that's all I have for this week. Thank you for tuning in. Again, my name is Brian Allen with International Security Training, and this has been a short webinar on the basics of conducting ID checks. Stay safe, everyone.